There is hope beyond hopelessness, regardless of what you're going through. Leaning into that fear and actually embracing that fear is probably a good thing, even though it's uncomfortable. Shame is never a productive emotion in terms of healing. You can't feel ashamed of where you came from. You have to find a way to find the purpose behind the experience. I've gone through some of the hardest things in my life in sobriety, but I've also had the greatest triumphs. Hey everyone, welcome to Flow Over Fear. My name is Adam Hill, and I just turned 12 years old. No, not from a biological perspective. As you can see, I'm a little bit older than that, but a gentleman does not tell his real age. Let's just say that I was born in the Jimmy Carter era. Some people may say that I'm 12 years old from an emotional standpoint, given my really immature sense of humor. That is actually accurate. So you can write that in a book. But I'm actually 12 years sober as of January 22nd. I've celebrated 12 years of sobriety, and that in and of itself is a miracle for me. As someone who came from a background of being completely out of control, lost complete control of my life, I was powerless over alcohol. And from that experience, my life became unmanageable, and I nearly lost it all in 2012. Now, I've told this story before many times, and I like to come back to it, because what I want to do is I want to make sure that people know that there is hope beyond hopelessness, regardless of what you're going through. And specifically for those people who may be struggling with some sort of addiction, or they feel powerless over something. It may be alcohol, it may be drugs, maybe it's sex or pornography addiction or gambling addiction, or any number of different things that we can be addicted to. Those things can feel like they have a complete control of our lives, and something that was at one time supposed to be pleasurable for us and is, by all outside appearances, though I would disagree with this, by all outside appearances, looks like it's pleasurable to other people, is all of a sudden our biggest tormentor, our biggest downfall, a source of trauma. That was certainly the case with me, and it may be the case with you. It may be the case with a friend that you know, or somebody that you know, a loved one, and you might be going through it on the periphery and experiencing that suffering in a similar but different way. But I would ask, this episode is really for a lot of different types of people. It may be for the person who is really struggling with that addiction, somebody who just wants a way out and wants a little bit of hope, to know that there is something, is help there for that person. But it's also for the people who may just be on that edge of, they feel like whatever their vice is, or whatever that thing is for them, if it's alcohol, maybe it's just a little bit, maybe they just feel like it's not serving them anymore. That's one thing that I've heard a lot recently in my circles of my different communities. I hear a lot of people, and this is such a wonderful trend that I'm hearing. I hear a lot of people just saying that I stopped drinking 6 months ago, not because I really had a big problem with it, but because it wasn't serving me anymore. Well, it was never serving me. And I think that reality, that realization that people are coming to is really, really powerful. That even these little habits that we get into, even if they're little habits, these things that we may be doing that aren't serving us, that we recognize them, and we just ask ourselves a simple question: is this really contributing to any happiness in my life or joy? Is it really? I mean, maybe there's a momentary buzz that happens when I have a glass of wine or beer or whatever, or I feel like I'm being social with friends. But what if that wasn't the thing that's leading to authenticity? What if I could actually find my authentic version of me when I wasn't if I'm not inhibited, if I'm not like that? Yeah, that's scary. But as we talk about on this show, leaning into that fear and actually embracing that fear is probably a good thing, even though it's uncomfortable. Embracing that fear and maybe not numbing it with an outside substance is probably a good thing. So that's what I would ask is you listen to my story, is just consider in your own life how those outside substances, and in the case with if it's alcohol or drugs or whatever it is, how is that serving you in your life? And is it really serving you in the capacity that you want it to? So in that spirit, I'll share my story, and hopefully you can get a lot from this. But before I do, I just want to say to that person that may be struggling a lot, who may be hearing this, that they're looking for that signal or that sign from God that is their cue to get help. Man, here's your sign. And I will say that there are resources out there to get that help. Every single one of these addictions that we might have, for the most part, have a community, a support group. For alcoholism, it's Alcoholics Anonymous. There's Alcoholics Anonymous. There's Narcotics Anonymous. There's Sex Addicts Anonymous. There's all sorts of things where you can get help. If you're feeling that now, if you're looking for that sign, if you've said to God, like I once did, God, if you want me to get sober, give me a sign. Here's your sign that maybe it's time to get help. My story is that perhaps that if I had gotten help sooner and recognized that there was help and recognized that I did have a problem, my life wouldn't have gone down a darker path. But 12 years sober into that, I have to look back on even the darkness that I went through and even the addiction that I went through. I have to look back on that with some level of gratitude. That may sound very, it may sound bad to say that. It may sound like I'm a dirtbag for saying that I'm grateful for putting myself and others through such harm. But in reality, it took what it took to get to where I am today. And I cannot, because shame is never a productive emotion in terms of healing. You can't feel ashamed of where you came from. You have to find a way to find the purpose behind the experience. And the beauty about our stories that are in our experiences that we've had is the beauty about those is we can tell a story. We can tell our own story. We can create our own story about those experiences that shapes our future. And I choose to create a story around that experience of living in my addiction. It's one that is empowering me forward to stay more productive and more servant-minded in my sobriety, because it took what it took to get to where I am. And feeling ashamed of who I was does not help. It's just a part of what my experience was. In 2012, after I had my last drink, and by the way, I was in a complete blackout after that drink. I don't remember the scenario around this. I came to in the back of a police car after getting a DUI and got driven to the jail cell wondering what had happened and really contemplating my own life. At that point in time, I broke the last rule that I said I would never break. I as an alcoholic, I constantly set rules for myself to prove that I didn't have a problem, or to prove to myself really that I was okay, that I wasn't a problem drinker. I was forming all sorts of evidence. I was creating these stories around my habits that gave me evidence that I was not a problem, that I didn't have a problem. I went to work every day. I was doing a job. I was functioning. I didn't drink before 5 p.m. I didn't drink hard alcohol. I stuck to wine or beer. So how could I possibly have a problem if I have this much control? Do you see how insane that thinking was? Like that I had to set all these rules for myself to prove to myself that I didn't have a problem. When I look back, it looks insane because I wasn't productive. I wasn't happy. I wasn't getting through life. I was enduring something that was painful and unsustainable. I was white knuckling my way through life, and I was burning out in the process. And for over a decade of my life, it was ugly. It was It was a painful experience living in that. It was a combination of waking up in severe panic and just exhaustion and poor health and waiting for the entire day to get to my next drink so that I could just feel quote unquote normal again. Hey everyone, I interrupt this program to introduce you to a powerful tool that will help you gain clarity on your vision and accelerate your growth and achievement. If you're listening to this show, it is likely that you have an exciting vision for your life. But the problem is that we often get caught up in the day-to-day. We get distracted, we face uncertainty, overwhelm, and self-doubt. And as a result, the gap between where you are and where you want to be seems insurmountable. And that's why I created a framework for how you can turn your vision into strategic, disciplined action that will accelerate your results in the next 90 days. I call it the Vision Reflection Retreat. It is a 2-day solo excursion designed to reignite passion and adventure into your busy life and realign your focus toward your why. This is the very same framework that I use every 90 days to reflect on my own life and my vision and set my goals for the next quarter. And it has been a game changer. And the good news is that I'm giving away this Vision Reflection Retreat guidebook for free when you sign up for my newsletter. Simply go to flowoverfear.com/retreat and download your free guide and enjoy the journey. And then I would repeat it the very next day and every single day after that. But there was one rule. I mean, I broke those other rules constantly, but there was one rule that I would never, ever break. I never wanted to break the drinking and driving rule because I hated people that drank and drove because they weren't just putting themselves at risk. I was fine with damaging myself or drinking myself into oblivion. That was just me I was talking about. And I hated me, but I didn't want to hurt other people. I didn't want to put other people at risk. And for people that would go out and drink and drive, they were putting other people's lives at risk. And that was just unacceptable and evil in my eyes. And one day I broke even that rule. And I had a lot of time in that jail cell to think about that and think about my life and where, if I had a place in this life at all, when I was sitting in there. But it was that experience that got me into the rooms of AA, that got me into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous in January of 2012. When I went into those rooms, I felt hopeless. I felt lots of shame. I felt I hated myself. I wanted to die. I didn't want to be on this earth. But the one thing I had, that one thing that I had to hold on to was this willingness to get sober. And what I immediately found in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous was a community of like-minded people that wanted the same thing that I had and were willing to share it. This is not an advertisement. This is not a promotion or whatever. This is just my reality and what worked for me. I went into those rooms not really trusting a lot of people because I couldn't trust myself. But going into those rooms, I found people that I could trust because they had a direction and they had what I wanted. And I immediately immersing myself and being willing to surrender my life to this group and to a higher power, to what I call God. That gave me a sense of purpose and peace, that there was something beyond that. I was willing to lean into the consequences of my actions and pay for what I had done and all of that stuff and heal through it and become a better person. Hope arose out of this idea of hopelessness because I was willing to heal. And so that particular element of healing is really, really important. And that's what I want to connect you with as I talk about my own personal experience, is that there is a community out there. A community is so vital to our healing. And another piece of that puzzle is a willingness. You have to be willing. because I had known about Alcoholics Anonymous beforehand. Is as much as many of you who may be struggling know about Alcoholics Anonymous, know it's a resource, but maybe too afraid or too or not ready, or you don't feel like you fit in, or you don't feel like you can relate to those people. I get that, but what I found, I because before I got sober, I thought about the same thing. I thought that I just didn't belong there. That wasn't my crowd. I didn't hide Jack Daniels bottles under the bed, but I was definitely one of those. But I definitely could relate to those people. When I finally got willing to see the relation of that, of how I was related, that's when I started to get it. And that's when I started to find some peace. When I leaned into the community, when I admitted that I was part of that community. That's what it takes. That's what it takes. And so that saved my life when I leaned into that community. It's not an easy first year, obviously, but it's not. But I'd ask you to think about it this way. Is it easy to live into those addictions that we have? Is it easy to be, to live day in and day out, hiding and numbing and doing all of that stuff? I will tell you that the life of sobriety is worth it. For me, what I learned when I got sober is that bad things will happen in life, that hard things will happen. Those challenges happen. One of the most important things that I've learned in sobriety, I learned early on from my AA sponsor, which is that that things don't get easier. They get better, but not easier. My life has gotten so much better in sobriety. The challenges have not. The challenges have gotten even harder. I've gone through some of the hardest things in my life in sobriety, but I've also had the greatest triumphs. I recently had the chance to watch Colin O'Brady speak at a recent GoBundance event, and it was amazing. I loved watching this event because he was sharing his epic adventures after, going through a challenge of being burned over half of his body. He talked about how he became a professional triathlete after never having done a triathlon before. And then he went on to climb, the peaks of the tallest mountains in the world, including Everest. He went on to cross the Drake Passage in a rowboat, for crying out loud. And one of the things he talked about was the idea of living in the ones and tens. We have these lives where we are living a life of where we want to strive to get to the tens. We want like life to be epic, to just have these epic adventures. In order to do that, in order to have the tens, we have to have the ones every once in a while. We have to experience the ones often to get to that point of 10. What I was doing when I was drinking was I was trying to numb myself into this point of being in a consistent 3 to avoid the trauma and the fear of the 1 and to avoid the risk of getting to a 10. And it was no way to live. These last 12 years have been amazing. Every single year just becomes reinforced in me that sobriety is the way to live, to the point where I don't see any particular use for alcohol right now for anybody, really. I don't see how there is a benefit of it in our society. I get it. If I don't want to yuck anybody's yum, if they're a wine connoisseur or whiskey connoisseur or something like that, but the more I live into sobriety, the more that I transcend that idea of drinking at all. It's not even on my radar anymore. And thank God for that. By the grace of God and by the grace of the community of sobriety that I've been able to immerse myself in. That's been the blessing of it. I really hope that the same can be true for you, whatever that addiction is and whatever that is, because what I want to share next is that after, you get sober, it's the idea of that obsessive nature going away doesn't really go away. I mean, our minds, our brains are sticky and they stick to ideas. They stick to different obsessions. I became obsessed with the Ironman triathlon for a while, and I had to actually rein that in a bit because it was just becoming a little bit too much. I became obsessed with working or brand building and all that kind of stuff, and it became too much. We have to be on guard. with a lot of these things in our lives where we might be just pushing things to the extreme because we have that obsessive nature. And that is definitely, true in my world. While I transcended the desire to drink, and thank God for that, I still work every day to kind of maintain some level of control over the rest of my life so that I don't, and guard over the rest of my life so that I don't get trapped into obsessions in other ways, because that personality is in there. And I think we all have that inherent nature. We strive for abundance, which is good. We strive for living this life fully, which is good. And I think we also have to rein in and step back and say to ourselves and ask ourselves, where do we need to rest? Where do we need to cut back? Where do we need to maybe fix those relationships with other substances that may be numbing us to living the lives in the extremes, in the ones and the tens that Colin O'Brady had talked about. So I hope you found some benefit to this episode. I will say that sobriety is a gift, and it's a gift that is given by God. I could not do it without a higher power. And it is an important concept that a lot of people in their worst of times feel abandoned by God. I certainly have in my life. I felt abandoned by God when I was in the midst of my alcoholism. But we have to remember that in order to be sober, we have to embrace a higher power, because we already have a higher power. If we're addicts, if we're addicted, we already have a higher power that controls our lives. For me, that was alcohol. But when I stepped into the rooms of recovery, my higher power became God. And that's when my life was saved. I hope the same can be true for you if you are struggling with addiction, alcoholism, or any other form of addiction or behavioral issues. Seek help. It is out there. Be willing. Just have the willingness to go in and ask for help. Find that community. Tap into that courage. You won't regret it. Thanks for joining me today. See you next time. Thank you so much for joining me today on Flow Over Fear. If you are liking this show, please do me a favor and hit the subscribe button. That way you'll be first to know when I drop a new episode, including interviews or trainings or dad jokes. That's right, dad jokes. Add a little levity to your life. And if you liked this episode in particular and you think somebody can get something from it, please share it with a friend. And that way we'll spread the message together. Thanks again for joining me today. We'll see you next time.